Our generation has always known war in the Middle East. For us, the image of American soldiers fighting in remote villages and desert hills is just a part of life. It permeates our news cycles, our entertainment, our presidential debates. Wherever you look, it's there. But many of us are still left with the question, and it's a question that I aim to answer today. Why are we still there? For over 20 years, America has been involved in a process called nation building, which implies the recreation of a new government in the image of America's in two nations primarily: Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, I'm sure we can all remember just last year, when the removal of American troops from Afghanistan led to the immediate collapse of our new government to the Taliban in just a few days. While many critics at the time pointed out the failures of American nation building, few noted that there is still 2,500 troops left stationed in Iraq today, holding together yet another fragile situation. Now, most of us, regardless of our upbringing or political beliefs, believe three ideas about the world and about America's place in it. One, that the American system of government is superior to any other. Two, that the world would be a better place if every nation replicated our system of government. And three, that it is part of our American duty to bring our superior values to the rest of the world. Now, none of these beliefs are necessarily evil. In fact, they've guided peace and well-being for millions throughout the world. I mean, think of the success of Germany or Japan after World War II. The policies that made those nations useful allies and freedom-loving economic powerhouses were grounded in those nations' histories, cultures, and infrastructures. Most importantly, they were administrated peacefully. This amiable nature is how America approached its allies in the 20th century. That was until Americans were shocked and scared, and rightly so. A faceless group of terrorists had just murdered in cold blood thousands of our fellow citizens, and we wanted revenge. So quickly, the three ideas I just talked about mixed with the search for revenge, creating the fatal concoction that would come to define the American experience in the Middle East. Quickly, in the eyes of the American people, and especially to American leaders, the two seemingly opposing ideas of revenge and peace became intertwined. Before we dive into the actual nation-building policy at play here, let's catch up on the history of Iraq. Since 1968, the nation had been ruled over by the brutal dictator Saddam Hussein, who oppressed and killed millions, developed biological and nuclear weapons, and was an aggressor in many unnecessary wars. Saddam Hussein was a despicable man, and the country that he created was also horrific. But no nation before, including America, had ever wanted to sacrifice its soldiers to topple him. That was until 2003, when the U.S. identified Iraq under the axis of evil, as George W. Bush put it, and in just a month of March of that year, we invaded and conquered Hussein's regime. But this is where the real challenge began. We would have to construct a new government that would practice American values in a place that was incredibly un-American and in a place that didn't have the infrastructure to support that. But our leaders didn't view it as such. The Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, Vice President Dick Cheney, among others in George W. Bush's nation-building team, they saw Iraq like a sandbox, unambiguous and low stakes. They thought that just by tossing a couple of seeds of democracy into the sand, maybe a polling booth here or a voting center there, they could grow a fruitful garden in the Middle East. But that's a naive notion. It's not how the world works, and it's not how people work. So we use cheap and underdeveloped policy to slap a facade of democracy over a fundamentally flawed and broken state. While I like to talk about hundreds of examples of failed American policy, a couple stand out in particular. The first of these is the abandonment of Baghdad. After conquering the nation, the logical goal of American forces should have been to secure the capital of the nation and home to over 5 million Iraqis. But Saddam Hussein had gone missing during the invasion, and more than anything else, we wanted him dead. So we left Baghdad undermanned and under-resourced, expecting the people to follow an unknown law and a non-existent order. And of course they didn't. So soon, looting turned to riots, turned to organized religious conflict. In fact, the conflict that began in Baghdad over 19 years ago will lead to the rise of groups like ISIS, which would extend our operations in the state by over 10 years. Secondly is the Transitional Council that we use to move power from our military to a new democratically elected Iraqi government. In line with American standards, this council was proportionally representative of the Iraqi people. But the people who've been ruled over for over 40 years by a minority religious sect and who had oppressed a large ethnic group for just as long didn't understand how the power dynamics in the nation could be so completely shifted by some abstract notion from hundreds of years ago. But we never bothered to explain it. We just expected the people to fall in line. And again, of course, they didn't. So many people who had once had faith in their new American leaders lost it. And it made it much, much harder for us to get a stable and functioning democracy off of the ground. Finally, picture the infamous symbol of America's bald eagle, clutching the olive branch of peace in one talon with the arrows of war in the other. This dual and misguided perspective is how we approached Iraq and the Middle East in general after 9/11. And it is what doomed many of our efforts. While this era may be nearly over, and American soldiers may even soon leave Iraq, the lessons we can take from it are everlasting. The ideology should not lead to ignorant policy, and the military violence cannot be conflated with peace. Thank you.